Hello, let us continue going through all openings after e4, and I'm trying to show it to you in the, so to say, chronological order. So what I mean is that from, that every new lesson, the opening is getting objectively more and more sound. Even though, of course, in a practical game, it's not the most important, because I guess after e4, e5 probably is the best move objectively. But so what? Yeah, if you feel like playing Pirc defense and you have good results with it, that's all what matters. So now we are going to study e4, e6, French defense. Actually, a very interesting, very special opening, in my opinion, because I played it myself from time to time. I mean, I know quite many chess players who used to play it, or still playing it from time to time, and everybody's complaining. Well, I'm talking about the top players, strong grandmasters. Everybody's complaining that it's such a difficult opening to play. Everybody lost quite an amount of games with black with this opening, but at the same time it gives some winning chances, maybe more than in some other openings. Strangely enough, this seemingly modest move e6, and there are, I would say, first of all, there is a lot of theory. Strangely enough, I don't know why, but especially for e6, there's so much theory. I mean, let's say even compared to Caro-Kann or Pirc, I think there is much more theory after e4, e6. Maybe because of the fact that the positions most of the time which arise in this opening are very complicated, very quite often even unbalanced. And that's why, the strategically, most of the time, especially when white is managing to play e5 after d5 in this or that variation, then strategically black's position is quite dangerous. But in return, he has his counterplay, which he has to develop rather quickly. So that's why, there were a lot of games were played in it, and I think it's a kind of attractive opening in a way with black, because there are lots of counter chances, and the game is very often pretty double-edged, even if, again, as I've mentioned, strategically it's quite dangerous for black. So that's why theoretically, yes, it will be quite I will stuff you with quite a big amount of theoretical knowledge in French, maybe more than in other openings, if we are not talking about, of course, Sicilian or Ruy Lopez. But I think it is important. I will try also to explain you what are the main options for white and for black, and what type of positions can arise. But again, also maybe I can also tell it about Pirc defense, that this French is a very, very strategically complicated opening. So after e4, e6, obviously it's very logical white should play d4. From time to time, white players are trying to play just this modest way of playing, d3, knight d2, followed by g3, bishop g2, and this kind of King's Indian style. But of course, it is a valid choice. It's possible to play it like this. I think most of the time white players are choosing it just because they don't want to go into theoretical battle. But of course, white is not, actually white cannot pretend to be better playing like this. It's just a complicated game. Another way of playing is to play c4, but that's also not very serious, because black is playing d5, and now he has an open game, easy game, and knight f6. He's going to take back the pawn on d5 and having no problems at all. So of course d4 is the best move. Clearly d5 is a must in this position. And now, I would like to share maybe my story about French defense into two parts, I would say, for the white players. So there are two moves basically which most of the time lead to a quiet position, positional game where white, if he wants, he can keep full control on the situation. If he's a strong player, well, being practically risk-free in a way, but at the same time, it also gives black a very good chances to equalize, and in general, the price for playing those positional lines is that black also has a relatively easy game. So this is the first chapter. But it very much depends on your style, on your approach to the opening. If you want playing white, if you want to be very solid and to have full control, then I would probably recommend you third knight d2 move. Otherwise, if you want to punish your opponent for playing e6, then probably it will be third knight c3 or third e5 move, which lead to both moves are very principal, leading to very often very complicated positions where theoretical knowledge is as important of certain concrete variation as a strategical understanding of the positions, but definitely black's play is much more difficult there as well. So let's start with the positional approach. First of all, there is a certain move bishop d3 here, but that is not too serious. I mean, you need to know if you are playing black what to do against it. Takes bishop f3. I mean, it's quite understandable that even if white has this bishop on the diagonal, but he lost quite some tempis, and black is doing fine here. He's playing c5. Usually white is trying to go knight e2, bishop e3, but minor accuracy is required and black has no problems. Then the other way is to play e takes d5. Well, e takes d5, e takes d5. Obviously, this is very safe for white. Most of the time, white is playing like this if he just wants to make a draw, but sometimes he also can try to use his extra temp in a symmetrical position, but it definitely will not be a problem, even though you can try it with white sometimes if you want to play very safe. But there is more than one way for black, I believe, to equalize here. For example, of course, c4 is too early now, knight f6, knight c3, bishop b4, and then castle, so black is very quick with development. Sorry, and he is not worse at all, can even be slightly better. So not c4 immediately, but knight f3, that's usually how they play this position. Or you can start with bishop d3, bishop d6, knight f3. And now there are two ways of playing. I think both are perfectly fine. So one is to start with bishop d6 with black here, with the idea that in case of bishop d3, of course you can put your knight on f6 now, play knight f6, but very interesting is knight e7, trying to, at some point follow up with bishop f5, just to change this bishop. I think it's also giving a good chances to equalize. But white is, if he's trying to play for advantage, this exchange variation of French defense, and he's probably trying to play c4. He would play c4, knight f6, knight c3. And then black, in my opinion, can even castle simply, cd knight d7, and then trying to get this pawn back. And I think it's very close to equality. But also, the very simple way of playing is d takes c4. Of course, it's a pity for black to give white bishop develop from f1, taking on c4 immediately, but still castles, let's say knight c6, h3, h6. Actually, according to the statistics, black is doing perfectly fine here. White has an easy game, kind of active position, but it seems that there is no advantage for white. For instance, rook e1, rook e8, and computer games and human games are also showing that black is doing fine here. But also there is nothing wrong with knight f6, in my opinion. Here, bishop d3, bishop d6. And now the latest fashion is queen e2 check, to play here queen e2 check, because otherwise, yeah, castle, castles, bishop g5, bishop g4, knight bd2, knight bd7, kind of symmetrical position, and the tempi is not really very important. The position is very, well, it's pretty equal here. So white's idea lately, white is trying something with queen e2 check. I have my doubts there is any real problem for black. So first of all, the idea is that if bishop e6, white is trying to play knight g5 and queen e7, then taking on e6 at some point and trying to use two bishops here. But from other point of view, black is also quite active. I'm not sure white has anything here. But also queen e7 is fine. Queen e7, and white is, I think, usually trying to take castles, maybe rook e8, and knight c3, c6, something like that. And well, white is trying to use a certain advantage in development to create at least some problems, but it will not be much. So all in all, e5 is not too dangerous. But knight d2 is much more serious move. I mean, the idea behind this move is, of course, knight on c3 is much more active. So knight on d2 is, it's not a great place for the knight because it blocks the bishop on c1. But the main idea is that white always can protect the center with c3 now, because with a knight on c3, one day if white plays e5, then after c5 he has some issues with the d4 pawn. So knight d2 is a solid move. There are some players like Anatoly Karpov in the 80s. He played a lot of this knight d2, a lot of games in his matches against Korchnoi, for example. And Korchnoi was suffering. But of course, since then the theory developed a lot. And if you're talking about latest times, I think Michael Adams, he always liked to play knight d2, played millions of games there, and trying to play safe and to have a certain small advantage out of the opening. I personally can tell you my experience that, I would say that I was always ready to play French defense with black if I knew that my opponent is not playing third knight c3. So third knight c3 is, in my personal opinion, and also statistically, is the best move. And if you want your opponent to stop playing French against you, I think that third knight c3 is a move which can manage it. Otherwise, knight d2 is, I played with black c5 here always, and I always felt like it's not the reason I would stop playing French. But of course, it's not so easy to equalize. So again, if you want a quiet game without memorizing lots of force variations, that knight d2 is definitely a valid choice. So black has now quite a number of options. Let's go one by one. I mean, first of all, d takes e4. That is always possible, also against knight c3. As you understand, the d4, knight e4, this position, if black wants to play this variation, which I'm going to explain you via the move order third knight c3, d4, knight e4. Then he can do it also, obviously, against knight d2. So that is possible, but we will talk about it later. Then, what are the other moves? The old main line is knight f6. Rarely played nowadays. Probably a bit dubious, but actually it's not refuted yet. It's not refuted. So now you see the main idea behind knight d2, that now after e5, knight d7, let's say c3, c5, you see that white has the c3, he protects the pawn on d4, and then he can continue developing with bishop d3, or even playing more aggressively, play with f4 and having then knight d2 to f3, really protecting the pawn on d4. You will see the difference when I will show you the variation third e5. Here, bishop d3 is the most logical move, knight c6, knight e2. So you see the big difference is that compared with the third e5 variation, now black has lost some tempi and having his knight on d7, which is not so well placed, and he's not in time to attack really the d4 pawn, because after queen b6, white can always just protect it with knight f3. So his only chance not to get bad position is immediately starting counterplay, CD, f6, trying to fight against the center. This is not only the best way, but almost the only way for black to play it. But actually, it seems to work. I mean, in some sense, I'm not sure it fully equalizes, but even according to the theory, even in the games of best chess players, I couldn't find a very clear indication that white has some advantage in this variation, but black has to know very well what he is doing. First of all, of course, knight f4 looks very dangerous move, but it seems that knight takes d4 is possible. Queen h5 check, king e7 with extremely sharp position, but probably it's perfectly fine for black. So the main line goes e takes f6. Now it's better to take with a knight. Queen f6 is possible, but after knight f3, let's say h6, otherwise some bishop g5 or knight g5 might come. Castles, bishop d6, knight g3, let's say castles, bishop c2, maybe preparing queen d3 at some point. I mean, yeah, the knight on d7 is not a great piece, and it's very difficult for black to get e5 at some point because the d5 pawn is hanging. So probably this variation is in white's favor. Therefore, I recommend you to take with a knight on f6, castles, bishop d6, knight f3, castles. Well, strategically, white's position is very nice, yeah, because black has this potential kind of still this typical bad bishop on c8, even though, again, one of the typical maneuvers is something like bishop d7, bishop e8, and bishop then g6 or h5, depending on the circumstances. Then this bishop can become a powerful piece also. But for now, also, you know, even if black manages e5, sometimes due to this isolated pawn on d5, he can be still slightly worse. But the main even problem that there is bishop f4, changing this bishop, and again, takes. Strategically, this position is very difficult for black, but chess is also a tactical game, so there are some very direct variations. Now the main theory goes knight e4. I remember I played a couple of games in the childhood with this line because I just liked strategically white's position, but it was not easy to prove it because black has some activity now, and there is certain problem with the d4 pawn. For example, if knight h5, then some queen b6, some b2 pawns hanging, d4 pawn is hanging. So it's not quite clear if white can manage to stabilize, because if yes, let's say if he can just change the knight, like knight g3, queen e2, and not to lose any pawn on d4, for example, or b2, then he will probably be better, but it's not easy to realize. And otherwise, for instance, there is the move knight e2. Now queen b6 is less strong because the pawn on d4 is never in danger. But then even according to theory, there is an exchange sacrifice. Rook takes f3, gf3, knight g5. And it might be actually just enough to equalize for black, to have enough compensation. So all in all, not quite clear if white can get an advantage with bishop d3 after c5. But there is a move f4. And this, I always found those positions very dangerous for black. Knight c6, knight df3, because of this knight on d7, which is not well placed, and so you will see this pawn structure in many other lines in French defense. And so what white wants actually just to keep the center. So the main ideas, black is usually trying to organize some central breaks like f6, even g5 sometimes, just to break this pawn chain, because if white manages to keep it, and then he slowly develop pieces, black's position is strategically quite difficult. So now queen b6 is necessary because otherwise white will develop bishop on d3, where it will be much more active than in the main line, and this position is probably just much better for white. So queen b6 just to avoid bishop d3, and also putting pressure on the d4 pawn. And now white is strategically having a better position, but his problem is that it's not so easy to develop his pieces, because all those breaks f6, g5 from all sides are coming. And so it's a complicated position. I still, in general, like white. I think white must be at least somewhat better here, but he needs to play very precisely, because there is also a chance to get under some counter-attack. So I believe, for instance, knight e2 is an option. Let's say then f6 probably can be played, and then g3. Anyway, so there are two plans. Normally, white is trying to play g3 simply here, but also, a very strange position, because white even sometimes just pushing his h pawn just to gain some space, like this h5. Black usually tries to stop h6, playing h6 themselves, then even a3, maybe followed by b4. So white is not really hurrying with his development, but just first wants to make sure that black doesn't have all those concrete, counterplay ideas like f6 or g5. An interesting way of playing with white, but also just playing g3 is possible. Let's say, because this check on b4. Now, with the idea that after bishop d2, black can take on d4, but actually king f2 is fine. This is a typical maneuver of this in this position. f6, king g2. It's actually just making this kind of strange artificial castle, but then after black castle, then white finally wants to get his bishop d3, knight e2, and he just needs to develop, and with such a powerful center, he will probably be much better if he manages. So black should probably do something like whether f6 and knight e2, bishop e7 or something, or bishop e7, and then white maybe is trying to play knight e2, castles. Quite often white puts the bishop on h3 here, just somehow to stop f6, and then slowly trying to develop, his pieces, because again, as I mentioned, strategically he has a very good position. Sometimes people and also computers are trying to push the a pawn in this position, castles, a4, I don't know, king h1, for instance. Statistics is not too bad here for black, but it's incredibly dangerous position for black, because white now is, slowly getting ready to develop his piece, and at some point probably will start a direct play on the king side. Some f5 is also a typical idea for white sooner or later in this position. I wouldn't play it with black. I find it, it's easy to get to great problems to actually without making anything wrong, just because your position is strategically difficult. So in my opinion, this variation knight f6 after knight d2, the main problem is this f4 variation, and I would not play it because of f4 first mainly. So then there is actually an interesting move, bishop e7, the Morozevich line, so to say, after knight d2, because he liked it a lot. He played a lot in the 90s, end of 90s, this variation against knight d2, because he was a big specialist of French defense. He played a lot of French defense. Actually, with rather good results. He was very imaginative, playing black. Playing on the black side of this opening. So bishop e7, hard to explain what is the reason, what is the idea behind this move, but it's like, the point is that it's not that easy for white to find a very useful move, something like that, I would say. But anyway, so if I still don't fully trust bishop e7, frankly, because white, anyways, he has a choice. So the idea behind bishop e7 is to try to avoid kind of positional lines where black is a little bit worse and trying to equalize. So the idea is to get to a unclear, complicated positions, unbalanced, even as in the lines of e5 or knight c3 on the move 3. But actually, it's not easy to achieve, because if white wants to be very solid and safe, again, I would advise white players to play with the bishop d3 here simply. And I think the idea of Alexander was to try to play c5, dc5, knight f6. And maybe black has decent equalizing chances, but still white is very safe. And especially if you don't want to refute bishop e7 and just to play solid solid move. C3, I think, is very solid. So if d4, knight d4, well, I would say that c3 is always useful in these positions. So yeah, nothing wrong with white. It's maybe a little bit better version for black of the third d4 variation, which we will consider later, but still white is probably a bit more comfortable and very safe. And after c5, because I don't know what else logically after c3, then white can be very safe taking on c5. Let's say bishop takes c5 and playing some healthy moves like bishop d3, queen e2, knight f3. Yeah, so this I can recommend you if you want to play it with white and if you want to keep full control of the position. This is one of the options against bishop e7. But there are two very interesting ways to try to refute, so to say, bishop e7, to play for advantage, for real advantage. One is e5, a very logical move since it's it's limiting the knight on g8. It doesn't have anymore the e7 square. But now c5 and queen g4. Okay, this of course is so to say, it's a tricky play. It's very risky for both sides. King f8 is what I think Marozevich was trying to do in these positions, and then dc5, knight c6, knight f3, something like this, h5, queen g3. A complicated position, but it might easily appear that actually it's in white's favor, because the king on f8 is a bit stuck. It's a typical French story, so to say. Yeah, we will see lots of those positions later on in knight c3, for example. But it's always not totally clear if white is really better. Black has his counter chances sometimes, but it might easily be that white is having it's very prosperous direction for white. And another, which is also knight gf3, that is maybe for me, I think would be the main concern for playing bishop e7 with black, because now black has not such a big choice, so he's playing knight f6. That is the idea. If bishop d3, then c5, and if e5, knight fd7. So now you see, black's idea of playing bishop e7 was to force white to get his knight to f3, so he doesn't have neither f4 after, let's say, c3, c5, neither bishop d3, knight e2 variation, but also bishop is already on e7, so that makes a difference. So now castles, queen, and the point is that there is the pawn on d4 is very vulnerable, as in most of the variations in this pawn structure. Most of the times in this pawn structure where white is playing e5, that is the main counter chance of black in this opening is trying to put pressure on the d4 pawn. And now, for instance, there is a possibility to play queen b6, but white has dc5 and maybe queen c7, a bit of strange maneuver, but white, let's say knight b3, knight d5, but white has quite some initiative here. Bishop f4, structurally black has a good structure, but it's just that his development is suffering, so it can be quite dangerous for him. But there is a g5 move, which is also hard to say if it's objectively completely sound, but it's interesting. It's an interesting move because black wants just to push g4 and then really starting have a real pressure on the d4 pawn. So probably white should take dc5, and then now the game becomes very complicated and sharp. For example, knight c5, bishop b5, bishop d7, maybe queen e2 or rook e1 is a very complicated position. When black is probably will try to put pressure on the e5 pawn and maybe even would think of making long castle at some point. Or after d takes e5, it's also possible to play g4, knight d4, knight d5, bishop b5 in a very complicated position. Very sharp, of course, dangerous for black because his king is in the center, but not so clear, not so one-sided. Again, if you want, of course, you can analyze this position with a computer. But all in all, bishop e7 is not refuted. It's a valid option, but it's not bulletproof, I would say. So definitely the safest and the most the most logical and probably objectively best move in this position is c5. which makes a big difference. It's only possible because the knight is on d2. With a knight on c3, the c5 move, I will show you later, doesn't work already. But here it's working. I will just quickly mention that there is a line a6, knight gf3, c5, which is also playable. Nothing too bad here for black, but of course, losing another tempi. The idea is that, well, definitely black very often in those positions, white has this bishop b5 check idea. So black is making a useful move a6 to prevent it, and then he's aiming for isolated pawn, like ed, for example. This position, not allowing white to check on b5, but at the same time, he just spent a bit too many tempis, yeah? He's not developed yet, so bishop e2, white is usually playing knight c6 castles. And in this position, I think it's very comfortable for white, slightly better. So if cd, then of course, white is doing this and taking back on d4, and I'm not sure it is a better version of the main lines after the third knight d2 c5, which I'm going to present you later. Sometimes I see Viktor Korchnoi, he likes to play c4 in these positions. But again, there is a lack of development. So I still believe after rook e1, bishop e7, even simple b3, simple logical move b3, probably black has to take ab, and knight f6, black manages to castle, but white has a bit more comfortable pawn structure, must be slightly better for white. So a6 is again a playable move, but not the most principal one. So then c5. Here, of course, there were lots of games in this position. So there are two different types of variations after c5. What black is trying to do, let's say after e takes d5, which is, let's consider it as a main move, even though white can really try to play knight gf3, but I will explain you later why to start with this move, with a knight gf3, because white gives some additional possibilities like this to black, but at the same time he's limiting black choices also, but that we better investigate once we check the main theory after e takes d5. So e d5 is the most popular move, at least it was. Now I think it's maybe knight gf3 is even more often played on the grandmaster level. After e d5, so now black has a choice. A conceptual choice. One is to take with a queen, so trying this or that way to play this typical pawn structure, because c and d pawn will be exchanged one day, and then this very typical pawn structure will arise. Another is to play e d5. Okay, of course, playing e d5 will most of the time, if not always, black will end up with an isolated pawn, but at the same time you see that he has much more active development. So it's a matter of taste. I think both moves are possible. Both moves are very close to equality. So I will show you first e takes d5. I think queen takes d5 is more popular in general among grandmasters, and I myself also played mainly queen takes d5 in my limited amount of encounters with French defense knight d2 c5. Still, I quite like queen takes d5, but e d5 is also perfectly fine, very playable. So knight f3, and now the, so to say, old main line, what Korchnoi was playing, and many other, like Vaganyan, also one of the chess players who played French defense all his life, and it was his main, if not only, repertoire weapon. So they usually played knight c6. Here, that was the old main line, bishop b5. Now you see white is developing his bishop in an active position. And the bishop d6, take on c5, take on c5. Unfortunately for black, he has to lose a tempi doing it, just to be in time to develop actually to castle. Now, castle knight e7, there is no rook e1 check. Knight b3, and this is a huge theory with a lot of Karpov games and some other strong players. Black can go bishop d6 or b6. I think in both of these variations, it's more comfortable for white. I wouldn't say black is close to equalize, but I don't think that he fully manages if if white knows well what he's doing. Let's say I would say that the main move is bishop d6. If bishop b6, then rook e1, castles, bishop e3. That's of course it's more active on b6, but like this, white manages to exchange it immediately. Yeah, even though after bishop g4, situation is not too bad for black. But more popular, I think, bishop d6, just to avoid the exchange of this bishop. And I think what's considered to be the best setup for white is to play h3, stopping bishop g4, castles, and then having bishop to d3, h6, to avoid all kind of knight g5 or bishop g5 ideas, c3, followed by rook e1. Again, a lot of theory here, a lot of games of Vaganyan, Psakis, and other very strong players. Playable for black, a little bit more comfortable for white, yeah, but possible. But I think then actually knight f6 system became a problem for the white players. Again, white is extremely safe after knight f6 and still tiny better, but well, also black's play is not too difficult and he is very close to equalize. I think you can check games of Evgeny Bareev, who played a lot this system with quite a success. So the idea of knight f6 is, again, if white doesn't want to check on b5, playing bishop e2, then his bishop is not so well placed. Yeah, knight c6, black shouldn't have any problems really to equalize. Let's say castle and then bishop d6, for example, takes, knight b3, bishop b6. There is a significant difference. Knight is, instead of on e7, knight is on f6 because there is no rook e1 check, and knight is much more active on f6. And then you play something like this, rook e8, h6, bishop g4. This must be okay for black, no problem. That's why bishop b5 check, that is the idea. And now black's idea is to play bishop d7, yeah. So the idea is to exchange this bishop and, yeah, to have much easier development, yeah. And actually quite an easy game, even if still white is tiny better, yeah, after bishop takes d7 check. So let's say bishop takes d7 check, knight bd7, castles, bishop e7, white will take sooner or later on c5, and then knight b3, knight e4, then black castles, rook e8, queen d7, this kind of play. Of course, there is still a small issue with the isolated pawn on d5, even though it's very well protected. And all in all, yeah, I can recommend you, if you want to play it with black, I can recommend you to look at Bareev's games. He played many games here and yeah, he played it well. So very, very close to equality here. Very little for white. So that's why it's more principal line actually is queen e2 check. Strange, a little bit strange, bishop e7, dc5. So white, like this, he wants to take the pawn and he doesn't want to give it back. Castles, knight b3. He wants to hold this pawn, rook e8. So now black wants bishop takes e5, so the only way to keep the pawn is to play bishop e3. And here, if you are black, you need to know some theory here. There is quite some theory, but I think finally, all in all, black is doing fine here. According to theory, it's playing a6. And now the idea is that after bishop takes d7, knight bd7, because of this pin on e line, white cannot manage to keep the c5 pawn. Let's say castle, knight takes c5, yeah, and you get the pawn back with the equal position. So what usually white tries to do is playing bishop d3. And now I think there is quite an interesting move. a5 here, also maybe not so clear, but the main line is bishop a4. Let's say, I mean, again, yeah, trying to take on b3 on c5, fighting to get the pawn back. Let's say knight fd4, knight bd7, etc., etc. I mean, finally, black is managing, for example, long castle, he managing to get back this pawn, king b1, something like this, rook c8. Well, isolated pawn, yes, actually already a Sicilian type of position, I would say. Yeah, looks perfectly fine for me for black. I think he has enough counterplay. So all in all, this e5 system and knight f6, especially knight f6, is not easy to get any serious advantage for white or any advantage at all. But also there is queen takes d5. Queen takes d5, now knight gf3. Yeah, because if d takes c5, yeah, I think black is perfectly fine. Both taken with a bishop on c5, let's say knight f3, knight f6, bishop c4, queen d8. Again, knight on d2, you see, is not very well placed. If white would have get his knight on c3, bishop g5, queen e2, you might have quite some initiative here. It's more difficult to get an advantage. But also maybe an interesting way is to take with a queen on c5, and then I think something like that is what I played once in rapid chess against Uifan. Knight bd7 followed by bishop c7, and I think black is doing fine here. dc5 is not too dangerous, in my opinion. So after queen takes d5, knight gf3 is a move. C takes d4 because black wants to play bishop, white wants to play bishop c4, so it's practically only move. Bishop c4, and this is a big theoretical position which was played thousands of times, also among strong players with both colors. So white in every line, if he wants, he manages to get back this d4 pawn, and then it gets to quite a typical pawn structure, which is in itself not too dangerous for black, but white has a bit of a lead in the development. So black still, as you see later on, in the lines I'm going to show you, black still has to finish his development, especially this bishop on c8, which is the eternal problem of the French player with black. Yeah, this bishop on c8, how to activate this bishop. But all in all, yeah, there is definitely, well, it's not going to be anything special for white, if something at all. Yeah, so it's very solid line for black. So if you don't want to play with isolated pawns, and some players, they just don't like to have a weakness, even if it's not such a big deal, this ed5 isolated pawn, but still, if you like to play without any structural weaknesses, then maybe this line is for you to play with black. Now, the usual move is queen d6, even though there are moves queen d8 and queen d7 nowadays, even like this. Black is playing, don't ask me why exactly. There are some small nuances. So here you will need to study theory quite a lot with either color if you want to play this variation, but I want to show you kind of short summary. Still the main move is queen d6. And now actually castles is the main line, but because again, yeah, white cannot play, well, it's not recommended to try to take the pawn immediately because there is queen before check and probably have to come back to d2. So castles, but there is an interesting line which was investigated, maybe half dubious, but it's playable, which is trying to play very sharp. Queen e2, knight f6, knight b3. So white have protected the bishop on c4 against queen before check. Knight c6, bishop g5, and the idea that white wants to make long castle, you see that he is pawn down for the moment, but there is a big lead in development. So white wants to use it and to play as aggressive as possible on castle, then finally to take on d4, and then he will have much more initiative than compared to the lines with short castle. So here it has to be investigated. This position, in general statistics, is fine for black, but there are some dangers. It's very, very unclear position. For instance, queen before check is one of the main lines. Bishop d2, I think it's useful to get this bishop to d2. Queen b6, long castle, bishop e7, bishop g5 back, let's say h6, bishop h4, bishop d7. White will probably, well, definitely manage to get back the pawn, but yeah, black is also very solid. I think it's double-edged, unclear double-edged position, which preferably you should analyze before playing. But normally white is playing castles, knight c6, knight b3. So that's the most important, point of this variation, that black is not recommended to play e5. He cannot really keep this pawn because of probably more than one reason, but mainly knight g5, knight h6, f4 just gives white too much initiative, and this is not recommended for black. So black normally develops his pieces, knight f6, and white takes back the pawn, knight takes d4, knight takes d4. Now, of course, changing queens gives nothing, even though quite some players like to play this type of endgame, trying to in future to use this 3-against-2 on the queen side. But yeah, I even remember I won one game from the Junior World Championship. I took with the queen and won this endgame against inferior opponent. But in general, black has nothing to worry in this endgame. So knight takes d4 is the main line. And here, yes, white usually plays a6 because anyways this move is useful to cover the b5 square. Bishop d7 is another try, something like this, but queen e2, it's a bit uncomfortable, the square on b5, so most of the time black immediately tries to play e6. And this position you need to study a lot of games here. In general, again, as a structure, it's a very solid structure for black, but and if you manage to get the bishop out from c8 one day, you will have absolutely no problem. But again, white has a bit of a development advantage and yes, some ideas here. There is some theory like rook e1, for instance. Now queen c7 is the main line, even though maybe bishop e7 is very solid, but like something like the c3 castle, queen f3, queen c7, bishop d3. So you see it's this kind of game where white is trying to develop some initiative on the king side. It doesn't have, black has no weaknesses, so no real target to attack, but the bishop on c8 is a bit, it's a little bit passive still. So yeah, black has to be still careful. I think rook d8 is one of the moves, for instance. And all in all, black is close to equalize, but white has a comfortable game, so to say. The risk-free, basically, game. Or after rook e1, there is a queen c7 move. This is more often played because black wants to develop his bishop into a more active position, like d6 or c5. And let's say queen e2, bishop d6, then bishop g5 is interesting. You see white is playing for initiative. Or bishop c5 is another option. You have to watch out for all sorts of knight f5 ideas in these positions, but most of the time they don't work. And c3, maybe h6. Okay, I mean, again, all what black needs is to finish his development comfortably, then he will be fine. White is trying to create some ideas, some active play before black manages. So yeah, all in all, so this is in general this e takes d5, knight d2, c5, e takes d5 line. I think that yeah, both e d5, knight f3, knight f6, and queen takes d5 variations are, well, very, very solid for black and is very close to equality. That's why from some point on, white players started to start with knight gf3 pretty often. I will explain you the point of it. So the idea is that white wants, first of all, to try to avoid the variation knight f6, e d5, e d5. And he also is trying to avoid the variation with, e d5, queen takes d5. But of course, black has some additional options like this. Because, for instance, black can play knight c6. So if you are happy playing this variation, knight c6, e d5, e d5, then you can simply play knight c6. Here, white has nothing better than to take on d5. But the thing is that queen takes d5 is not working anymore because white has bishop c4. I mean, and then of course he will just take on c5. He will not give the pawn on d4 anymore, and seems that he's having a good position. Black lost at least one tempi compared to that variation, to that line. So after knight c6, e d5, then black has to take with a pawn already, and bishop b5. So at least white managed to get to this line, which is probably more promising than some other lines of knight d2 c5 for white. But still, it's no big deal, so to say. And if you playing black, if you study these variations and with knight c6 and you find it very playable, then you just wouldn't care if your opponent played knight gf3 first or e d5, you still get there. But otherwise, if you choose some other option, then you have to find what exactly you want to play here. Because, for instance, knight f6 is an option. Now, of course, if e d5, you can just play d5, so you get where you want. But now e5. That is why white starting to play this forced knight gf3 became rather popular, because at some point it was considered to be not too dangerous. But then people realized that simply bishop d3, because black can actually take the pawn simply on d4, playing queen b6, and white cannot really manage to keep the pawn on d4, because dc5, if dc5, of course, black, it's already not so good. I guess bishop takes c5, and I'm not sure if, then probably coming f6 or queen c7. I'm not sure if white even can manage to protect all the pawns. Otherwise, of course, knight b3 doesn't work because of c4, obviously. So white, if he wants something in this life, he needs to sacrifice the pawn, castles. And I remember in the 80s or even 90s, this was considered to be a dubious sacrifice. So, okay, kind of position where white has some play, but after all, black is pawn up and should be doing well. But lately, people started to play it more and more and realize that things are not so easy. So I think the main move here is queen a4. And I wouldn't say that white is better here. I'm not sure, but it's quite he has quite a serious compensation. Very often, actually, simply a positional compensation. Not that he's really doing something, winning by force or mating, but just because he has active pieces, advantage in development, and it's not easy for black to castle in this position, because, for instance, if he plays bishop e7, that white has queen g4 move, and probably g6, and then bishop h6, and the king is stuck in the center. Of course, black has a very healthy central extra pawn, so it's also risky for white to play like this. But still, with the king in the center, it's not to everyone's taste, to play, even having an extra pawn. I think the main line here goes queen b4, queen c2, queen c5, now already queen e2, because with the queen on c5, white will have a tempi bishop e3, something like this, bishop e7, bishop e3. Now, because with the queen on b6, probably black would have just played bishop c5 here, otherwise has to play queen a5, something like this, rook ac1, and white has a c line, knight on d7 is not such a great piece, and quite a dangerous position for black, even though maybe objectively it's fine. If you analyze it and you are happy with it, I'm sure it's not too bad for black, at least, But like this, playing knight gf3, white is trying not to give this knight f6, ed5 line, So then, if you want to play the line with queen takes d5, then you just take c takes d4. So now again, if ed5, queen takes d5, you get where you want, and you don't really care if your opponent started with knight f3 or first e takes d5. But here, what white tries to do is trying to take with a knight on d4 already. And black has a choice. I think the main line is knight f6, the most common move. Knight c6 is also okay, because bishop b5, bishop d7, now white cannot really get isolated pawn. He's not in time to take any more ed. But all of a sudden, after knight takes c6, I think it shouldn't be much for white, if anything, but it's not so easy. Practice has shown that black has to solve certain small problems still in this position. For instance, very logical to take with a bishop, but now white is playing like this, c4, knight f6, queen a4, very important move. So let's say queen c7, and then he is in time at least playing like this, cd5. It forces black to take with a knight, and probably b3, followed by bishop b2. And there is a certain structural advantage, even if it looks like black with accurate play must be able to hold this position, but still not to everyone liking this c6, weak c6 pawn. Therefore, b takes c6, and now bishop d3. Black has some development problems. Why bishop b5? Because white really wants black bishop to be on d7 instead of c8. If it would have been on c8, then black would have just played knight f6, and in case of e5, which is here very strong, yeah, black would have just played knight d7. But here, because bishop is on d7, now he has to go to g8, and that is, of course, not what black wants. So that's why queen c7. I just show you briefly the theory here. Queen e2, so white still wants to stop knight f6. And usually black tries to put his knight to g6 here, like this, then bishop d6. But again, rook e1, let's say rook b8, b3, and this e5 is on the agenda. Let's say if black castles, then white has this e5, sometimes h4, some initiative. So not so easy to equalize. With black, it's very close, probably, but practice showed that, there are some problems still to solve. That's why quite often black plays knight f6 here, because e5 is already not so dangerous. Yeah, as I mentioned, knight d7 and knight c6. Very important that in this position, knight can retreat to d7 after e5. Still, I think white can try with bishop d3, and I think here, even though maybe more than one way to be fine for black, but I like bishop a6 move, because if bishop takes a6, obviously you check on a5 and you take back the bishop, and otherwise, once you change this bishop, black has nothing to worry about, definitely. So knight f6, white usually plays here e takes d5, and now both moves are possible. Knight takes d5 or queen takes d5. There is quite some theory, let's say queen d5. Normally, white tries to play knight b5, knight a6, and is trying to develop here a little bit strange position, because it's knight on a6 and knight on b5 are not very typical. Yeah, for this variation. So maybe due to this knight on a6, white has certain chances to get slightly better, but black is quite solid. And the most solid probably is knight takes d5 move, and just developing and getting into this very typical game. Yeah, typical position a6, castle, queen c7, and so on. So complicated game. I think lately I saw Grandmaster Kovalyov, he started to play knight e4 move here with a moderate success. So maybe this can be investigated. But all in all, I would say that, again, this knight f3, I think it's a good choice for white anyway, because it's an interesting choice, because you kind of avoiding some system, and you create a certain headache for your opponent to understand how to react against it. And with black here, you have to choose what exactly because again, if you play knight f6 ed system, then you have a problem. Then maybe you should investigate this position here, e5 knight d7, and I think it's probably okay for black if you analyze it well, but this is a sharp position which you need to analyze. Otherwise, if you like queen takes d5 system after e d5, then you probably should play cd4. Analyze cd4, and then trying to find a very clear equality after either knight c6 or knight f6 here. So yeah, all in all, the summary of those positional systems against French is that exchange variation ed5, it's playable from time to time, but I don't really believe white can have any real chances to get anything with it. Knight d2 is a very solid system, which if you like a quiet game, you can play. It can be your full-time repertoire. Or like Adams, he played it for I don't know how many tens of years. Knight d2 from his childhood. So with black, you have a choice, as I mentioned, different moves, which are knight f6, bishop e7, which are leading to more like sharp game, a bit more risky, definitely, but the game is more double-edged. Or if you want to equalize, to play solid, then to play healthy, solid central moves, then you play c5, and then you choose the system according to your preferences. I believe all in all, if you know it well with black, this, again, I would repeat, this is not the system which would make me worried so much with black. And yeah, I'm sure you can always find against Nd2, you can always find something which will well be satisfactory, and you will not be having problems out of the opening with black.